Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and today I have a video about the Warcry FAQ. I have been thinking I was 2 weeks away from releasing this since last April, I think. Certainly a lot of folks have been getting antsy. Now, I'm going to do a few videos on the topic of this FAQ. I'm pretty excited about it in a lot of ways. Let me know in the comments what kinds of things you're looking to see for this, especially if you're new to this video from Goonhammer. I know I don't post on that website very often, but for stuff like this, it's really exciting to get Warcry into the sort of Warhammer paper of record. But for now, the FAQ just dropped. I'm not going to go line by line. There are other content creators who do that kind of stuff. You know, you are perfectly capable of looking it up, going onto the GW downloads page, etc. I want to go with just kind of the highlights and lowlights. So if you don't have enough time to go down to GW and read it, you can kind of hear my TLDR here. Otherwise, if you read it and you're not sure exactly what to think, listen to what my sort of top three and bottom three are from it, and you can make your own decisions. Highlight number one for me, and this was pretty close because there's another one with the newest factions that I'm pretty hyped about, but highlight number one for me is the Destruction redesign. The entire Grand Alliance for Destruction has been kind of retooled, rebalanced in a really nice way. Kind of standardizing everything. So for example, Stab Grot, Pot Grot, and Noblars have all kind of moved up to 50 points. They covered there were like these weird exploitative ogre underworld fighters who were super cheap for no reason and had more wounds. Those have been kind of bumped to where they're supposed to be. There's also been some small taxes on the most popular pieces. So, for example, the Crusher and the Gut Lord have both gone up 10 points. I was really hoping the Crusher would get away without a nerf. I was hoping I was kind of under the radar there, but I, foolishly played it in a tournament and ended up going 4-0, and it's hard to go under the radar at that point, right? But I was hoping that Gut Lord would be the only one that would get got there, but it didn't happen that way. They also put some taxes on the Brute Boss and Morgok. I think that's kind of a shame, but I get why you do it, right? You're just looking at play rates, and it's like the most played ones are going to get the tax. I think this is probably made by people who don't necessarily play a ton of Destruction Soup themselves, because if you do, you know that you really wish you didn't have to play Brute Boss and Morgok, and you're only doing it because you're completely outmatched in certain missions against the Swarm Warbands. So personally, I would have left them alone just because that's not necessarily the strength of Destruction Soup. The strength is in that ridiculously cheap chaff that, yes, you don't spam it, but it's there to give you activations at the beginning of the game before your opponent has had the opportunity to get into it and start deleting it off the board, which lets you then have like last move advantage in the first round so that you can really devastate your opponent starting like from the very first activation of round two. And luckily, they brought some of that stuff in line. And the other thing that's really cool is they did big buffs for Gloomspite Gits. So for every little bit that they nerfed Ogres and Cruel Boys, they buffed Gloomspite to bring them in line with the two. So all three factions are kind of, I would say, in an equally solid place here because they have a similar structure to them, but kind of different things orbiting around the little grots. And so now I think they're kind of equal. I would kind of think Cruel Boys are maybe third among equals there. They do have Shank, who's probably the best piece in any of those groups. But aside from Shank, their leaders are pretty medium. They do have Gut Rippers, though, and Gut Rippers are pretty sweet. But Gloomspite just got so many new tools, is the thing. So Netters are now 50 points, which is wild to me. They are only T36 wounds, so that's doable, but 50 points is so little. Shootas are now 60 points. Now, Shootas don't do a lot of damage, but for just being cheap and spammable, being able to just have 3 Shootas being annoying and you're only paying 180 points for that seems really nice for Gloomspite Gits. there's just a lot of list building now that you can do in Gloomspite. And so I think that Destruction Soup is in a really excellent place right now, which is exciting. I think, the most busted stuff that Cruel Boys could do, that Ogres could do, has all been curbed, I think, to a place where people are going to find it really reasonable. I don't think anybody's going to feel overpowered by it. But people who love their Cruel Boys, who love their Ogres, are still going to be able to play some pretty cool lists. Maybe it would have been nice if Ogres could have had like a fan favorite like the Blood Pelt Hunter come down, or if Cruel Boys could have had like a Killaboss come down a little bit to kind of make up for some of it, to kind of encourage them to branch into new play styles. But for the most part, I still think you're going to have a lot of fun brewing these lists with those two factions, and Gloomspite has some real juice. Now, kind of the flip side there, I was super excited with how they redid Destruction. I was actually really excited by the kind of light touch that they gave Skaven. They nerfed Rat Ogres, and they also nerfed Packmasters. And then other than that, they didn't nerf that many things. And so that was good to just see that, Skaven is still going to be really good. They still have that incredible battle trait. They're still going to be able to resurrect fighters all over the place. Skaven with a Storm Fiend and a bunch of bodies is still going to be really good, and that doesn't even use a Rat Ogre. And you can still use the Rat Ogre combo if you want to, right? So Skaven is still going to be really good, but just like the things that were annoying the most people are going to just be curbed a little bit. So that was another really nice touch to a former S tier faction. Really liked those. The only thing was some of the other top factions got this kind of weird buff treatment, which I think if you're going to nerf a bunch of the top of the metagame and then actually kind of buff a couple other S tier factions, that could end up creating a pretty awkward metagame at the top in Warcry, coming up here. So one is Dispossessed. They got 10 points cheaper on all their chaff. I actually think Dispossessed had fallen out of the S tier recently. People were kind of figuring out how to kill dwarves easier with kind of which fighters you should be blessing and which ones not. But they were still pretty good, especially on a pack that has a lot of objective missions. My theory, though, I'm not that mad about Dispossessed. My theory is that, one thing people have been complaining about a lot is that sometimes Dispossessed can be kind of unfun, and Over My Dead Body would kind of make more sense as a leader ability anyway. And so if you made Over My Dead Body, which is their ability that allows them to count for 3 instead of 1 on an objective, if you made that tied to the leaders, you would encourage Dispossessed to play pretty different playstyles. But the only way to keep Dispossessed viable if you did that would be to drop the points on almost all of their fighters. And so it seems like 10 points off on all of the little dwarves feels like that's what I would do if I was going to make Over My Dead Body leader locked, right? And so that's what I think happened. I'm assuming that they just meant to make Over My Dead Body leader locked, and then it just kind of something got lost in the copy paste. It just didn't end up in the FAQ. Because if that had been the change, I think everyone would have been pretty pleased with it. But, as is, Dispossessed is going to be really good for a while. They're going to have a ton of ability to flood the board. They used to be able to put some bodies, but not as many as they wished, and those bodies weren't really doing much. Now they can actually put some real offense on the board. They can have 3 Iron Breakers to be cheap kind of weight batteries, and then they can have like a few Hammerers to actually put real offense onto the board and still be able to have like really big allies to combo with the reaction. So there's a lot that Dispossessed can do now that is very, very powerful. But it's possible that it gets if there's ever another FAQ, which I'll get to later, actually, I'm not too worried about that. But in the next FAQ, they might get reworked. For now, though, I would say Dispossessed are really scary. Soulblight are almost as scary as Dispossessed right now. They've been kind of the best warband of the last 6 months. I'm not putting them above Dispossessed because Dispossessed was also very good and got a significant buff, right? But Soulblight has been the best warband just recently, like over the summer. basically before, when Soulblight was first nerfed, they were still pretty good. They still had a whole bunch of really good Underworlds warbands, but Ironjaws existed and really kept them down, because if you kind of tried to wait around and stuff against Ironjaws and with what Ardboys could do, you were just going to get slaughtered. And so Soulblight kind of wasn't that good until the sort of last FAQ a year ago, where Ironjaws got nerfed. They were Soulblight's biggest predator, and only a couple of the Underworld's fighters got nerfed, and so the Exiled Dead are still probably the best chaff in the game, other than Shank. The Exiled Dead are insane. I know some people think that Gorath is one of the best fighters in the game. Personally, I think he's just like a little bit better than the Bestegor Destroyer from Spire Tyrants. But then again, there's people who swear by the Bestegor Destroyer from Spire Tyrants, and Gorath is better. So either way you slice it, Gorath is incredible, right? Whether you think he's one of the best in the game or whether he's just good. Zondara's Gravebreakers, I used to think they were kind of bad, but that was when Ironjaws ruled the roost and you just couldn't do their shtick. Now you can actually do their shtick, and I think that they are a little bit more useful. And they also got some kind of small buffs in this FAQ, things that, not as big as Dispossessed, but for example, in Kato's group, the sort of named character box, Aurelius, the snake wizard, gives them a really nice little shooter, with kind of a little bit of utility if you want it, but also 20 wounds at a very cheap price. And, just like Soulblight Gunline is kind of a thing now with Daintalos, and then like Necromancer and Aurelius, things like that. The cap to counter is actually a pretty good buff to Soulblight Gravelords, because they weren't using counter anyway. They were only ever using their reaction, so they don't care about it. So the warbands that are missing, like wish they had counter, have gotten weaker, and Soulblight has gotten better, right? Also things like, if you did play with a Vamp Lord, a lot of people weren't, but a lot of people were. If you did play with a Vamp Lords were actually really bad against counter, and now they're solid. Also, the biggest buff to Soulblight Gravelords is the nerf to Brute Bosses out of Destruction. Brute Boss used to be one of the few things that sort of other warbands could do to make it so they really didn't have a lot of fear of Soulblight Gravelords. On a 5 objective mission, you were still screwed, but like on a 3 objective mission, you could use the Brute Boss. For those who don't know, every show is someone's first. If this is your first, welcome, by the way. But if you don't know, the brutes in Ironjaws have this ability called Umessin, and it makes it so that anything with wounds below 15 just doesn't count on the objective. And so brute bosses are just very, very strong against something like the Soulblight zombies, the Arc zombies, regular zombies, Zandara's zombies, etc. Brute bosses are excellent against those. And now that they've been nerfed a little bit, that's another feather in Soulblight's cap. So they were already doing incredibly well, and they got some very subtle buffs here. So I'm pretty frightened about the Soulblight meta. There are things that TOs can do about it, right? You can just have tournaments with very few objective missions, things like that. But it always feels bad when you as the TO feel like you have to kind of put your thumb on the scale. That's never fun. The other odd choice, and I don't know if this is a low light. I'm not excited about it, but I think some people are excited about it, is the Dankhold Troggoth. It got buffed by 100 points, which feels a little random to me. Like if you're buffing something by a very large even number, it's like, how did you get to that number really? But either way, Big Danky is just 275 points. He's very cheap. You can buff him with either +1 toughness or +1 attack. I think both of those are completely reasonable. And he becomes a ridiculous powerhouse for destruction. I think Dankhold Troggoth is supposed to make up for some of the destruction tools that got nerfed. I think that people should be a little bit more worried about Dragon Maul than that. I think people are kind of sleeping on how good Drag and Maul was. It's not the worst thing as far as, do we want to experiment with bringing monsters back into the meta? But it is pretty reckless. um, I'm surprised that they went for an entire 100 points. I think you could have taken a much more nuanced approach if you were interested in putting monsters back in the meta. You could have maybe taken 3 or 4 of the worst chaos ones, dropped them by 40 points, then dropped the dank hold by like 60 or 70 points, something like that, as a first step. It's pretty strange to me just seeing the dank hold at 100. But, we'll see how it shakes out. Back to being positive, though. I am excited about some of this stuff. There were really big glow ups for some of the old bespoke teams, especially some of the ones that were just really, really bad. Tyrannic Cohort, especially, I think is incredible now. Their Bone Centaur, their leader, went down by 30 points. It's ridiculous. Or was it 30 points? Either way, he's 205 now, which is insane. They also got a buff to their ability that lets them, this is the wild dice generator, it lets them just kind of spam wild dice more than once per turn, which is really strong. So you can do like the wild dice ability, wait, wild dice ability, and move again with the Bone Centaur as an ally, which is insane. I actually just checked to make sure that you could do that because that seemed too strong for me, and you actually can. So yeah, because he has the 7-inch move, so he can still do it twice and still get to his objective wherever he needs to get to set up for his quality sort of 3-inch range hits in round 2. And then, that's a ridiculous amount of wild dice that you could potentially roll. Let's say you've got just like, 2 3s, 2 5s, you're rolling 8 dice with it. You're going to roll some 5-ups there and just be in a ridiculous position for the rest of the game. And that's just an ally that all of Death can have now. And it's very competitive with, all of the other things that Death has, right? Like Wielder of the Blade all of a sudden is like no longer the sort of default choice. Now, that's not a bad thing, right? I'm actually kind of glad that Wielder of the Blade has real competition now, but it's just like incredibly powerful. The other thing that is very, very strong with Tyrannic Cohort, and maybe this is good, maybe this is bad, but you just have a few Tyrannic Cohort things. I think the Cycloptians got really good. Almost everything in the Warband went down, but the Cycloptians I think were really close to being good before, and they just weren't. They just needed like a couple knobs turned up, and getting 20 points on those, getting a couple of those, getting the leader. I don't think they got 20 points. I think they got, bear with me, people. How many points did these guys get? They got 20 points each. Wow, that is a ton. So they got 20 points cheaper. So just like 2 of those in the leader. And then, of course, the Exiled Dead. You bring in the Exiled Dead into those, and that's an incredibly powerful sort of generator for wild dice, and then you use that on the Exiled Dead's ridiculous abilities, and then you just have these solid profiles surrounding the dead, and it's a very powerful combination that people can do now, which is pretty cool. I think people are going to enjoy Tyrannic Cohort. I think it was actually one of the better designs of 2nd edition, and so I don't love the thought of facing the Exiled Dead Tyrannic Cohort, but I do love the thought of facing like weirder and wackier things with Tyrannic Cohort. Like, let's say, maybe instead of Exiled Dead, you're just bringing in a Nighthaunt hero who can resurrect anything. And now you have a bunch of Tyrannic Cohort stuff. And then also maybe you choose another weird ally, like the Cardinal from Flesh Eater Courts is a perfect little addition there. And now you just have a lot of really good abilities in your Ossiarch Bone Reaper type list. Things like that. There's a lot of really interesting, creative stuff that you can do with Tyrannic Cohort, and that's awesome. Claws of Karanite got a really good glow up. The Bloodwhelp with Claw Flail is a sort of cheap guy. He's kind of too strong to be considered a chaff fighter before. He was 90 points before. He got a 15-point buff, which is insane. People don't realize how big a buff that is at the lower points costs. And going from 90 to 75 points, that is a legitimate backbone piece now, because they have 12-inch or 12 wounds for 75 points, and they're not slow. And they've got the 3-inch range. And so, or is it 2-inch? I haven't played claws in ages, but they've got range. They're not range 1. And so they're able to stay alive. You can have a lot of them on the board. Claws of Karanak also got a big quality of life increase with their ability gimmick, where they kind of chain activations. Their leader also went down points as well. Untamed Beast players are in shambles because the Claws of Karanak leader has the exact same profile. It just went way down. I don't think unjustifiably, though. I think that that's probably where the Untamed Beast's Heart Eater should be as well. But he's actually like a legitimately interesting ally now in Chaos. Just a lot to really love for Claws of Karanak. It's going to be so much easier for them to do their shenanigans. You're going to be able to have real numbers on the board and maybe an ally, things like that, which is awesome. There's also kind of smaller glow-ups, smaller buffs for Riverblades and Pyrogeists. Pyrogeist is much smaller. Maybe the Pyrogeist changes don't move the needle, but basically you got 15 points on the really interesting guys that you would like build around for Soul Blaze ability. I think the Pyres didn't get enough to move the needle there. The fighters who make pyres, who benefit from pyres, who do all of the pyring, those fighters I don't think are good enough yet. But the ones that you would build around for Soul Blaze, for kind of actually doing the fighting, I think that those guys are in an acceptable points cost now, where you can make legitimately pretty sweet casual warbands with it. Riverblades are kind of interesting because Crest Dancers, especially the ones with the range on them, they essentially just got a free wounds blessing. All of them went down 15 points. I'm really glad they didn't drop the chaff. That's nice. But they all got these free 15 points, so you can just either have them be really cheap, or you can treat it like a free wounds blessing and have them be just like more durable than they were before. And I think this is going to be sort of way easier for list building. It's going to make chaff clearing possible, like to have 3 Crest Dancers, and then you're mostly on your 65 point guys, but you've just got like a little bit of offense out there. I'm kind of bearish, honestly, on the counter change, which is something I'll get to later. That was in the article for the FAQ. That was one of the more hyped up changes. I don't think it's going to have as big of an effect as people are maybe hyping up, but I do think one faction that's going to significantly get better from the change is going to be Drillin' Riverblades, because Crest Dancers are like the perfect fighter to get blown out by counter, even with the wounds blessing. But now, when you know you're only going to get hit for 3 damage, and you do legitimate damage yourself, and you're running around with the 3-inch range, so you might be like hitting this guy to finish it off, and then hitting that other chaff model to finish it off, potentially getting countered each time because you're fighting lots of different things with them, and you're needing them to do a lot of work because they're expensive. This is something where, you know, you might actually really benefit from this. They also, because they have all that range, they will often not be in these long, protracted fights, which is a big part of why I don't think counter is going to be as impactful for most fighters as people are saying. But for something like the Crest Dancers, they won't be getting attacked nearly as much. They'll be getting countered a lot because of their range, and that's the fighter that's going to benefit. So I do think Riverblades could be a lot better soon, which is awesome. Now, the low light that a lot of people have noticed, I think I wanted to wait for this one. I wanted to put this in the middle of the video instead of near the beginning, because I'm pretty pumped about a lot of what's in this FAQ, but I was pretty bummed out about this stuff in particular. There's a lot of professionalism issues with what's in here, which it's hard not to read between the lines, as far as, you know, a lot of folks saw that there was an FAQ, got really excited, like, oh, GW does love us. And then it's like, you look at the attention to detail that is so low here, and you start to wonder, like, it feels much more of a throwaway and much less like an investment in Warcry. So, for example, things like some of the profiles, like the Deathbringer profile, there was a Nighthaunt one, just have like this random empty space, like they forgot to put the picture of the fighter in there. The article itself is just not professional level marketing copy. Like some of the phrases there, like I'm sure you could search out Warcom saying incredible new rules like at some point before, right? Or, things like a metric ton of new units, phrases like that, that it's not like they never appear on Warcom, but they never really appear at that level or like this often in this voice. Just, when you read the article, it's clearly not really a Warcom level bit of marketing copy. The same is true with the rules writing, where there's just like a lot of things. There's a certain Seraphon guy who, like, rules as written is just immortal. If he spends a double, he just can't be damaged. That's kind of a weird sort of piece. There's things like, some abilities will have bullet points, and then some abilities will have bullet points when there's not multiple options, which is kind of odd. So there's like things like the rune mark on some things looks like it was copy pasted from a darker font sort of piece, like they used MS Paint or something. Like there's just a lot of places where it doesn't feel like this was sort of professional level output, which, it's certainly better than no output. I think some people were making that point online when faced with, let's back up. I haven't posted online yet about this issue, but I've seen a lot of other folks sort of notice it in various places like Reddit or Discord or places. And one of the responses that comes out is, well, wouldn't you rather have a sloppy FAQ than no FAQ? And obviously, we would rather have a sloppy FAQ than no FAQ. But it does, going back to sort of reading between the lines here, it does just let people know, like, Warcry is not a priority. Sort of the idea that this FAQ has somehow saved Warcry, I wouldn't say is true. I would say, just based on just the kind of the professionalism on display, it doesn't necessarily feel like a fully fleshed out product, which, it's great to get the FAQ, but it doesn't really bode well for the future of the game, I would say. Now let's get back to positivity. I don't want to dwell on that kind of stuff. One thing that I think is cool here is they really aggressively explored new design space. It's kind of the flip side of the low professionalism, honestly. So it's like there's a real fuck around and find out idea on display here, or like central guiding principle. And I think you could argue about whether or not that central guiding principle is like good or correct or not, or sort of something that should be the guiding principle. But in my opinion, like, having a point of view is better than not having a point of view. And at least this FAQ does have a point of view. And they're going really aggressive as far as finding wacky ideas, things to kind of go off the wall with, that, in some of the situations, I think will be like major swing and a miss. Like Deathbringers might be good, they might not be good, but I think they're going to be unfun regardless. If Deathbringers turn out to be like a really important competitive piece in Chaos, I think it's going to really hurt the game. If Deathbringers turn out to be as medium as I think they are, I think it's going to make a lot of people sad who sort of read the Deathbringer ability, go like, whoa, and then they try it the first time, they hit, their opponent is sad, the second time they miss, they spent a triple to do zilch, and then they're really sad and they lose the game on the spot, and then all of their games are just about, does the triple do what it needs to do, and it's not going to be fun. That said, some of these, kind of on the same philosophy, are incredible. The Icon of the Storm Has a really cool control aura. I think he's pointed not quite at the competitive level, but more aggressively than most Idnet Deepkin heroes are pointed, for what he's doing. We need more fighters doing this type of thing. We need more fighters giving us this kind of control poo-poo platter, because he's saying his aura says no disengages within 3 of me, and you deal 1 less damage. It has kind of the classic Warcry FAQ problem. This isn't unique to this FAQ, but it's always been somewhat ambiguous whether 1 less damage is to hits or to hits and crits. I usually rule it where if it doesn't say crits, it doesn't crit. It doesn't do crits, because there are other rulings where it, there is a distinction between a hit and a crit. So I would say it doesn't reduce crits, but it does reduce hits. But I've heard other people rule differently on it, and it would be great to have it more explicitly stated. Phlegmus Potbelly, or whatever his name is, the Nurgle guy, has really cool design space on display as well. I think cycle counters are a really cool idea. I don't necessarily like what the triple ability, or is it no, it's a triple. I don't really love what the triple ability does with the cycle counters, but as far as design space of putting counters on guys and then using them later, I think it's really interesting. It's a little awkward that the effect of the counter only lasts 1 round, but it's a permanent counter. But if it's fun enough, it doesn't matter if it's awkward. And so I'm excited to test it. The fact that the double can sometimes be free and sometimes not be free is pretty interesting design space. I would say personally that those 2 areas of design should have been broken out onto 2 different abilities. Like, if you were actually going to test whether these concepts are fun, you would really want them to be in different places on different abilities. But it's still cool, like, in terms of how aggressive it is. I think that's fun. Borget Wolfkilla has another kind of tracking thing called trophies, where you kind of mark a fighter, and then your allies, specifically only the ones with the sort of underworld's sort of same rune mark as Borget, they all get +2 attacks whenever they attack the thing you're marking. I think that's a really cool concept. Again, I don't think the execution is as clean as it should be. We're going back to this, like, it's not necessarily professional level rules writing, but it's still really cool. Like, yes, the most effective way to do this is probably just to mark the thing that you are in combat with, and then you get +2 attacks when you fight it, and it's a double onslaught for just a double, which is ridiculously powerful and kind of boring. But when you read the ability, you get this awesome imagination of what could happen, where you mark something and then your friends descend on it and they all attack it, and they're all getting the bonuses, and it's like a very evocative ability. And I think that's coming from the right place, and that's very exciting, and I think it's really cool. So, is the execution right? I don't know, but it's cool that people are swinging for the fences this way. It does kind of feel like, again, Warcry is the lowest priority, because we are getting these kind of very raw, it's like, we haven't tested this stuff, so you get to kind of ideas here. But, that's fine. I think a lot of people will have fun being the guinea pig. A final lowlight is a bit of a skeleton pool meme situation. There are just some perennial basement factions. They're just never getting their lifeline. This was like my biggest worry about the second FAQ, the one that happened a year and a half ago. Because when second edition came out, there was an FAQ 6 months after the edition, and it was awesome. People felt great to be getting attention that quickly. And then they took 15 months to do another one, and people were sad. But that 15-month FAQ, one of my biggest sort of worries about it was, how come so many of the worst factions just didn't get any change to them? And, another FAQ came out and there were still no changes. And now this one comes out and there's still no changes. Things like Daughters of Cain, who are like these glass cannons that don't cannon. and Idoneth Deepkin, which don't really do all that much of anything. Although the eels aren't terrible, I will say the eels are not terrible. And the Underworld's Warband, the last Underworld's Warband, is legitimately good, but you have to be spamming Underworlds to do it. The regular IDK does nothing really. The other dock, which is Demons of Khorne, they just have like these very mid to low profiles, which would be good if they had abilities, but they literally don't have abilities. Their leader abilities, they have none. So like, what's going on with them? They're just like wildly unplayable. They're so bad. And then there's also Twistweld, where like the buffs are just clearly not enough. Twistweld, their problem is all of their abilities are so bad, and that wasn't really changed. And the buffs are just tiny for these like super fragile mid-range fighters that don't really do anything other than die. So it was kind of too bad to see so much of the bottom of the metagame kind of left. That said, I'm still really happy that like a lot of the recent bespoke warbands got a glow up, but it is kind of too bad. Like, it really does feel, when you look at how Soulblight Gravelords have been A tier or better for the entire 6 years of Warcry's existence. Well, they weren't around for the first year, but so ever since they've been in Warcry, they have been good. There has really only been maybe 6 months where they weren't like very top of the metagame. That was, during the Iron Jaws reign, and where they were just like weak to that specific faction, like I said before. But other than that 6-month period, they have been good the entire time of Warcry since, the second year of first edition. It's become a meme on this channel, like that, like, oh, another Soulblight hit piece from the Salty Sea, but that's because they are constantly one of the problem factions. And so it's just weird to see like these factions that have been at the bottom of the game for at least 3 years. Doc and IDK were at least pretty good in first edition. Demons of Khorne were very mid in first edition. But these factions that have been really bad for 3 years are just like not going to be part of any of these FAQs. I mean, we've had FAQ after FAQ after FAQ, and nothing's happened to them, which I think is too bad. I do think that there's kind of a theory out there that the counter rework is going to be good for them, and I just want to dispel that right now. I've seen some people post that like the counter rework is going to save elves, and that's just not true. It is going to save Yadrill and Riverblades. It is going to save them. Riverblades have exactly the types of fighters that really need counter to be not as good in those crest dancers, and those fighters got a buff. Daughters of Cain really only has like one fighter that's like that. Now, first of all, let me sort of break down how I see the counter rework. Basically, fighters with a lot of attacks, like the 6-attack Wrathmaster from Khorne, or the Gore guy from Daughters of Cain, or the Akelian King from Idoneth Deepkin, those fighters are going to get better, but they're not going to be good in their own factions. The Wrathmaster might, because Khorne is good separately. Khorne is doing a lot of strong things without the Wrathmaster. But for the most part, these fighters are not going to be good in their own factions. Knave Black Talon is going to really gain a lot from this, but she's not going to gain it in her own faction because their factions are not doing anything without them. Witch Elves are not held back by counter. They're held back by the fact that they die as soon as someone attacks them. You don't even bother countering a Witch Elf. You just attack it. And so that's really why elves are bad. The counter rework is going to help, certain elvish heroes. I think it's going to really help things like, certain mid-range fighters that have kind of a medium amount of wounds, but a decent amount of attacks. So something like the Myrmidish Painbringer, I think, is a really happy recipient of this counter rework because it has, 4 attacks, 3 strength, 2/4 damage. You really, with the toughness 5, you really want your Painbringers up in your opponent's face, and a lot of fighters can't actually damage them through that T5. And then they have a bunch of attacks. But then those fighters that can't damage them, they actually just sit back, don't even attack, and just counter wall them. And you'll take like 4 or 5 damage every time you attack them because you're on 4/3. And now it's like you can weight of dice your way past that with a Painbringer. Elves don't have the tools to do that. I mean, some Painbringers are elves under all that armor, I assume, because they are Slaanesh, and Slaanesh feels like Chaos Elves. But like Order Elves are not going to have that problem because they don't get that far. So I don't think counter rework is going to do anything for Daughters of Cain or Idoneth Deepkin, even though I actually do think it's mostly good for the game. I think it's going to be solid. I think it's going to really help certain parts of Chaos. Blood Warriors are happy to see this. Blood Warriors are bad. Counter rework is not going to help Blood Warriors, but they are happy to see it. The Chaos Warrior with 2 weapons, with the 4/4/2/4 profile that just got a 10-point buff to go down to 110 points. That guy's going to be really happy about the counter rework. So there are some fighters that are going to be really happy about it, but I don't think it's helping the factions that it was meant to help, which is too bad. We can't end on a low note, though, because this is Warcry. This is our first FAQ in 11 months. We have to end with a little bit of hype. And to me, there's 2 like little bonus highlights that aren't as big as the other topics I wanted to cover, but they are pretty cool. The first is we've got another FAQ coming in 2 or 3 months. I don't know if it will be a full-on FAQ, but we know there will at least be a rules download of the Chaos Dwarves. And it would be really easy to package up like a points rework or something. Like if people notice that, Soulblight is way too good following this, or like, Doc and IDK don't seem any better in people's testing. I mean, who am I kidding? Like nobody who posts online tests, so whatever. But I've stopped posting on Big Cry because it's like every time I do, never mind. Let's not talk about that. Anyway, there's a lot of people who don't actually play the game a lot, who have a lot of opinions, but hopefully we can get to a point where, people have tried this out and have time to put in some feedback before this Chaos Dwarf download comes in, so that maybe there can be a few points on things that got missed. Maybe Exiled Dead can get 5 points here, 5 points there on some of their Arc Zombies. Maybe, something can be done about like Sisters of Slaughter or Namarti Thralls or something in those elf factions. I think that there is kind of, the fact that there's a follow-up to this means that we didn't have to get it in one. And a lot of those professionalism issues that I talked about, where this feels like a first draft, that feels like a first draft, this doesn't feel like it got, the real like, editor copy that we could have had. If all of that gets cleaned up in 3 months, then we're going to forget about all of this, right? So that's really awesome. And it makes me really happy. So there is like a real chance that a lot of the flaws in this FAQ kind of get cleaned up when the Chaos Dwarf rules come out. Now, that might just be copium. You might listen to that and be like, that's ridiculous. And it might be ridiculous, but there's a chance. And that's a thing to call a highlight. The other thing, I want to talk about the mid-range experiment. Like I just said, the counter rework does nothing for elves, but it's so good for like mid-range Chaos Dwarfy size or Chaos Warrior sized fighters. I think it might be good for like the Cow Mountain elves who are actually dwarves, but like the 3/4/2/5 version of it with the pick. That's a fighter that with only 12 wounds, it really can't afford to get countered, but man, is it scary like most of the time. And so that's a real bonus from the counter rework. Then you've got all the buffs to Chaos Warriors. They might be playable, they might not. I've got a couple lists I've been brewing with like 4 Chaos Warriors and, a couple Marauders and a couple allies, things like that, to kind of get a warband with an actual like variety of silhouettes. One of the things that can be kind of frustrating to me about certain types of Warcry warbands is they don't look that pretty on the table because there's like all the fighters are the same size because you're just spamming the same damn thing. I really like when there's multiple silhouettes going on, and a sort of Slaves to Darkness warband that has like 3 Marauders, 3 Chaos Warriors, and then a couple big things is pretty cool. And so I do think that they are kind of this is kind of a grand experiment, basically. Like with this Chaos Warrior buff, we're going to find out if just mid-range regular fighters with pretty regular profiles can be sort of pointed to a place where they are compelling without necessarily just being wound spam. Because Chaos Warriors don't have crazy abilities like some of the mid-range fighters that do get played in this game. So they just have to succeed off of their kind of general all-arounderness. And there's not a lot of jack-of-all-trades fighters in Warcry that are good. And this is a cool experiment, so I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be running Chaos Warriors. I'm probably going to do like a little 3-round event really soon here in Minnesota, and I'm probably going to run some flavor of Chaos Warriors to that. And I'm really excited to see how they do and what kind of stuff they're capable of. So there is a lot to really love about this FAQ. To anyone who is hoping for pure cheerleading, I'm sorry I couldn't give that to you. There were just too many things that required talking about, right? But I am really happy that we have it. I am sort of pleased about kind of the place the game is in, maybe not competitively right now, but from like a casual perspective, from a narrative perspective, we're in desperate need of new narrative rules, but I have been kind of working on that and seeing other people homebrew different types of like campaign settings and campaign kind of modules for Warcry. I think that Warcry is very like D&Dable that way, and that you can create little campaign modules for it that can work really well. And I'm really looking forward to signal boosting stuff like that, because I think we can get to a place here where Warcry is very sustainable. Maybe we're a few factions away from being able to do it competitively right now, but in terms of, getting these new models into the game, getting sort of a few little tweaks here and there, it's a lot of very exciting stuff. So this is a good time for Warcry, even if there were things I pointed out that I didn't love here. It is a very good time, and so I'm very excited. I hope you try out some of the new fighters that came out in this FAQ, and when you do, I hope all of your rolls are crits.